The rain had been falling for an hour when Curtis Ballard put both hands flat against his pregnant wife's chest and shoved her backward off the curb. It wasn't a slip. It wasn't an accident of the crowd. Nadia felt the deliberate weight of his palms, the little grunt of effort he made, and then her heels were skidding on wet asphalt, and her arms were flying out, and both hands, without any instruction from her brain, folded over the swell of her belly to shield the baby who had 8 more weeks to go. She caught the side mirror of a parked sedan. Cold water ran into the collar of her dress. Somewhere behind her a woman was laughing. The woman was named Bianca Reyes, and she was standing under the restaurant's green awning in an emerald dress and dry suede heels, holding her phone up sideways, filming. She had a good laugh, warm even. The kind of laugh that made strangers want to be near her. She was aiming it at a woman kneeling half in the gutter in a downpour, and she thought that was funny. Beside her, under a wide black umbrella that kept every hair in place, stood Gloria Ballard. Curtis's mother did not laugh. Gloria never did anything so vulgar as laugh. She watched her daughter-in-law fight to keep her balance on a flooded street, and her face arranged itself into an expression that a kinder person might have mistaken for concern, but that was, in fact, satisfaction. The clean, quiet satisfaction of a woman watching a stain finally lift out of a favorite tablecloth. Curtis didn't look back. He put his arm around Bianca's waist, said something into her hair, and steered her toward the valet stand, already digging for the ticket in his jacket. He was 39 years old, and he had just pushed the mother of his unborn child into traffic, and he was worried about whether the valet had scratched his rims. Nadia stayed where she was for a moment. Not long. 11-12 seconds. The rain was very loud. She got her feet under her. One hand still on the belly, one hand on the cold metal of the car, and she breathed. In through the nose, slow, out through the mouth. The way she'd learned to breathe in trauma rooms at 3 in the morning, when a body was crashing and everybody was looking at her to see if she'd panic. She didn't panic. She had never once, in her whole life, panicked when it mattered. She reached 2 fingers into the neckline of her ruined dress and found the thing she always wore there. A silver thimble, small enough to hide in a fist, threaded onto a fine chain. It had belonged to her mother. 40 years of a thumb pressing it had worn the little dimples nearly smooth, and inside the rim, if you held it to the light, you could still make out 2 engraved initials that no one but Nadia had looked at in a very long time. She closed her hand around it and held it for the length of one breath. Then she took out her phone, and she made a single call, and she said 6 words to the person who answered, and she hung up. 9 minutes later, 2 dark cars slid up to the curb without a sound and stopped exactly where she stood. A man in a charcoal coat got out of the first one holding an open umbrella and a dry wool wrap folded over his arm. He didn't speak. He settled the wrap over her shoulders like she was something breakable, and a second man opened the rear door, and Nadia got in, and the door closed, and the cars pulled away into the rain and were gone, leaving 2 thin lines of tire track that filled with water and disappeared. Across the street, under the awning, Curtis Ballard was showing Bianca something on his phone. He was laughing again. He would not be doing that for very much longer. For 4 years, the people in Curtis's small, pleased little world had known her as Nadia Keller, the vet tech, the quiet one, the wife who worked long shifts at an animal hospital, came home smelling faintly of antiseptic and wet dog, and cooked dinner without being asked. She paid the bills and kept the calendar, and remembered the birthdays, and never, not once, raised her voice. Gloria called her capable, the way you'd call a decent used car reliable. Curtis called her low maintenance, which he meant as a compliment, and which told you everything about Curtis. What none of them knew, what she had spent 4 years, and a great deal of quiet effort making sure none of them knew, was that Nadia Keller had been born Nadia Ravenscroft, the only child of Whitfield Malcolm Ravenscroft, who over the course of one long, ruthless lifetime had built the Ravenscroft Group out of a single New England shipping line into something with fingers in maritime logistics, surgical device manufacturing, timber and port real estate in 19 countries. 2 different business magazines had tried, years apart, to estimate the family's worth. Both had given up and printed a range with the word PAC in the caption. Because the trusts sat inside the holding companies, and the holding companies sat inside other holding companies, and no one on the outside had ever gotten to the bottom of it. The conservative number had 9 zeros. The real number was a family secret, and the family kept it. Nadia had grown up the way a fish grows up in water, so completely surrounded by the money that she couldn't feel where it stopped and the world began. By the time she was 15, she could tell within a minute whether a new person was interested in Nadia or interested in the name. By 20, she'd stopped keeping score, because the answer was almost always the same, and it had stopped being interesting. Her mother died the spring Nadia turned 11. It was slow. There was a long stretch of good doctors and quiet rooms, and a house that got very careful and very silent. And at the end, there was a bed by a window and a hand that got lighter every day. Nadia sat with her for most of it. She was the one who learned to read the machines, who learned which nurse to flag down, who noticed the small changes before the adults did. And somewhere in those weeks, she made a decision that a child shouldn't have to make, and that shaped the rest of her. She did not want to be the person who wrote the check for the private room. She wanted to be the person in the room. She wanted to be useful with her hands. She could have been a surgeon. The path was paved with gold for her. She only had to walk it. Instead, she got a job at 17 mucking stalls and holding horses for the vet who came to the family's barns. And she found out that she was good at the thing almost nobody is good at, which is being calm and gentle for a frightened animal that can't understand a word you say, and can't ever thank you, and will never, ever want your money. She trained as a veterinary technician. She did it under her mother's maiden name, Keller, on a scholarship she applied for like a person who needed one. She moved to a rainy harbor city in the north, where the Ravenscroft name meant nothing, because Ravenscroft companies built dry docks and hospital equipment, not shopping malls with the family name on the roof. She rented a small apartment over a laundromat. She drove an 8-year-old Subaru with a cracked cup holder. She wore scrubs to work and jeans on the weekend, and always, every single day, her mother's thimble on its chain. Materially, it was worth almost nothing. She would have walked into the ocean before she let anyone take it. Her father, who was a man of very few words and a truly obscene number of resources, had understood. He'd nearly lost his own marriage to the weight of the money before his wife's illness burned everything down to what mattered, and he understood his daughter's need to be looked at plainly by someone. When she left, he'd said one thing to her, standing in a doorway with his hands in his pockets like an ordinary father. "People show you everything," he'd told her. "When they're sure you're no one, let them think it. It's the cheapest information you'll ever get." She'd carried that sentence around like a second thimble. It had gotten her through a lot of long shifts and a lot of loud rooms. It would get her through the next part, too. She met Curtis Ballard on a Thursday, at a friend's gallery opening she hadn't wanted to go to. 4 months after she moved to the city, he sold high-end interiors, showroom furniture, the kind of couches that cost more than her car. And he talked about it the way some men talk about combat, with a reverence that assumed you'd be impressed. But he was funny. He asked her about the animal hospital, and actually listened to the answer. He showed up when he said he would. And the thing that undid her, the thing she'd waited her whole life for and stopped believing in, was that he didn't Google her, didn't fish about her family, didn't ask a single sideways question about money. Because as far as he knew, there was no money to ask about. She watched him for 2 years before she married him. She watched how he treated the busboys and the parking attendants. She watched how he handled it when a big commission fell through. She watched what he said about women who weren't in the room. He came up decent, not extraordinary. She saw the vanity, saw the way he needed to be the most interesting man in any conversation. But decent, and after a lifetime of people reaching past her toward the name, decent had felt like a miracle. She'd let herself believe the test was over and she'd passed. They married in a small ceremony she planned entirely herself. Curtis contributed enthusiasm and a toast that ran 4 minutes too long, most of it about himself. She filed that away and told herself it didn't mean anything. The marriage settled fast into a shape she recognized and kept deciding to forgive. She ran everything. The mortgage, which she paid out of a vet tech salary on purpose, because the test required it. The utilities, the insurance, the taxes, the groceries, the meal planning, the deep cleaning, the appointments. Curtis's whole professional social life. The dinners that kept his network warm. The cards she signed with both their names in her handwriting. And Otis. Otis was a 14-year-old rescue. A barrel-chested shepherd mix with a gray muzzle and one cloudy eye, and a bad thyroid that needed a pill every morning wrapped in a slice of turkey, and a knee that needed an anti-inflammatory, and a standing appointment at the clinic every 6 weeks. Nadia handled all of it. In 4 years, Curtis had never once given the old dog his pill, never known where the pills were kept, never learned the name of the vet who wasn't Nadia. He came home and ate the food and sat in the clean house in the clean shirts and watched his shows and slept in fresh sheets, and it never once occurred to him to wonder how any of it stayed the way it stayed. The gap between what she carried and what he saw got wider every month, and he didn't notice the gap, because he was standing on a bridge she had built across it. Gloria made it worse, monthly. Curtis's mother had spent 30 years managing a busy dental office, and a further 15 presiding over the flower committee at her church, and she carried herself with the authority of a woman who had once controlled a supply room and never gotten over it. She wasn't cruel the loud way. Her method was soft and surgical. She'd never raise her voice. She'd just observe, out loud, in a tone of pure helpful worry, every flaw she could find or invent. "You work such long hours, dear. I do hope the house doesn't suffer. A man wants order when he comes home, not chaos." The house was spotless. The long hours were because Nadia spent them keeping frightened animals alive. She said none of that. She offered more coffee. Curtis's younger sister, Shelby, had inherited the exact same gift. "Nadia's such a trooper," Shelby would announce at family dinners, like Nadia's competence was a quirky hobby instead of the load-bearing wall of the entire family. "Honestly, I don't know how you hold it all together on what you make. You're like a little machine." A little machine. Nadia smiled and added it to a ledger. She kept in the part of her mind that none of them could see, the part they'd all decided, because she was quiet, must be empty. She found out about Bianca on a Wednesday, folding laundry, 8 weeks pregnant with a baby she'd told Curtis about 3 days before. It was a receipt in his jacket pocket. A wine bar she'd never been to. On a Tuesday he'd told her was a client dinner. 2 entrees, 2 glasses of something expensive, 1 dessert, 2 forks. She stood over the dryer holding it while it clicked and tumbled, and she felt the thing happen inside her that she would later think of as a wall taking on load. A slow structural shift as the weight moved to a place that could bear it. She held the receipt for maybe 30 seconds. Then she folded it, put it in the pocket of her own coat, and went and put a chicken in the oven. She didn't confront him. She investigated. Over the next month she built a file with the patience of a woman whose father had made his fortune on due diligence. Card statements with the same 3 restaurants and 2 hotels she'd never heard him mention. Phone records with 1 number that showed up 60 and 70 times a month, for the better part of a year. One gray Friday afternoon she sat in the Subaru across from his showroom and watched him walk out at 4:30, with a tall woman in an emerald coat who got into his car and kissed him before he'd even started the engine. Bianca Reyes, 31, a rep for a high-end lighting brand, single, the kind of woman who wore heels to a Tuesday lunch and wanted you to notice. Nadia documented every piece of it. Dates, amounts, a handful of photos taken from across a parking lot. She organized it into a folder on a drive nobody else could reach, and she updated it every Sunday night, with the same steadiness she used on patient charts, while Otis snored on her feet, and Curtis slept upstairs in the clean sheets. She didn't cry over it. She'd hidden a fortune to find a man who'd love her for herself, and she'd found a man who loved her for her usefulness and would throw her out the second something shinier walked past. The test was over. This time, the result was permanent. Her father had told her to let them learn it the hard way. She was ready to teach the class. The night in the rain wasn't an accident either. It was a performance, and she'd been cast without her consent. Curtis said he was taking her to dinner because she'd asked. She was 8 months along and hadn't left the house in 5 days, and the walls were starting to press in. He named a Harborview place they'd been to before, said he'd made a reservation, told her to wear the navy dress. When they walked in, Nadia saw Bianca sitting alone at the bar in Emerald, waiting like she had somewhere to be, and she understood the whole thing in about a second and a half. Curtis hadn't planned a dinner with his wife. He'd planned a night with his girlfriend, and brought his pregnant wife along as cover or as a warm-up. Someone to drop off at home before the real evening began. And then she saw Gloria and Shelby at a corner table, already seated, already watching the door, and she understood the rest. It was choreographed, a little family production, and Nadia was the extra they'd invited so they could enjoy dismissing her. She sat through 40 minutes of it. She ate nothing. She watched Gloria watch the bar. She watched Shelby smirk into her wine. She watched Curtis check his phone under the table again and again. The baby kicked twice, hard, like it could feel the current in the room, and then Gloria set down her fork and delivered the line the whole thing had been building toward, in that soft, kind, poisonous voice. "You look worn out, dear. Why don't you go on home and rest? We'll look after Curtis." Look after Curtis, as if he were a child. As if Nadia were the sitter, being let go early. As if the woman waiting at the bar in Emerald weren't the entire reason for the evening. Nadia stood up. She picked up her bag. She walked to the door and out into the rain, and Curtis came after her. Not to say he was sorry, but to manage her. He caught her arm at the curb and put his mouth close to her ear and said, low, more warning than plea, "Don't make a scene, just go home." She pulled her arm free, and he shoved her off the curb. She didn't go home. Home was a house full of his shut-off notices waiting to happen, and it wasn't hers anymore. She went instead to a brownstone in the old part of the city that she'd bought 3 years earlier through a trust, that she had never mentioned to Curtis or to anyone, that she'd furnished and stocked and kept clean for no reason, except the quiet certainty a door that only opened for her. When the cars brought her there, the lights were already on, the heat was already up, and a doctor from a private practice was waiting in the front room to look her over. Before she let the doctor touch her, before she took off her wet coat, she made one more call, and it was not to her father, and it was not to a lawyer. It was to the man in the charcoal coat, and she gave him an address and one instruction. Go to the house on Aldous Street right now, tonight, before Curtis Ballard ever gets home. Take the old shepherd in the kitchen. His name is Otis. His medications are in the cabinet over the coffee maker, the thyroid pill and the joint tablets, and the printed schedule is taped inside the cabinet door. Take all of it. Do not leave that dog in that house for 1 hour with that man. 40 minutes later, a photo came through on her phone. Otis, gray-muzzled and blinking his one good eye, curled up on a blanket in the back of a warm car, the orange prescription bottles lined up beside him. Nadia looked at it for a long time. She had not cried over the receipt, or the pushing, or the woman laughing. She cried a little over the dog. Then the doctor examined her, and the baby was fine, and she was bruised on one palm and one knee, and her blood pressure was up, and she was told to rest, and she sat in a chair by the window with Otis asleep against her feet, and she called her father. Whitfield Ravenscroft answered on the first ring. He always answered his daughter on the first ring. It's done, she said. I need the full team by morning. Legal, financial, and the investigators. Done, he said. And then, because he was her father before he was anything else. Are you safe? Yes, the baby? Fine. She's fine. She heard him breathe. She heard the specific silence of a man holding back resources that could reshape a small nation's economy. Nadia. What did he do? He pushed me into the street. His mother watched. His girlfriend filmed it. The silence after that was the kind that comes before something structural happens. Before the crane swings, before the wall comes down. I'll be there by morning, her father said. Don't answer him. Don't answer any of them. Let the team touch it. She set the phone down and put both hands on her belly and felt the baby turn over, slow and deliberate, settling in. She did not sleep. She planned. By 9 the next morning, 3 things had happened, and Curtis Ballard didn't know about any of them. The first was a protective order, filed by 4 attorneys, backed by the doctor's report, and by a time-stamped incident record from the private security detail that had been sitting in a car across from the restaurant all night. A standard, low-profile detail. Her father kept on her in that city, one she'd never mentioned to Curtis because it would have been a hard thing to explain to a man who thought she made $49,000 a year. They had dash cam footage of the shove. They had everything. The second was a forensic accountant who needed about 5 hours to map Curtis's entire financial life, because Curtis's financial life was not complicated. It was, however, propped up. His salary and commissions covered his car and his bar tabs and his wardrobe, the mortgage, the utilities, the insurance, the taxes, the credit card minimums. Nadia had carried all of it out of her vet-tech's paycheck, and on 3 careful occasions she'd documented, out of a personal account quietly attached to the trust, small transfers timed to 2 bad quarters when his commissions came in late, and the house would otherwise have slipped toward foreclosure. She had receipts for every dollar. The third thing was the one that mattered most, and it was the kind of coincidence that only stops being a coincidence when you understand who Nadia was. The Ravenscroft Group's real estate arm ran a routine review of its Harbor District holdings that quarter, and the review turned up, among a dozen other properties, the financing behind the one deal Curtis had been staking his whole future on. He'd been chasing the interiors contract for a new boutique hotel going up on the waterfront, a signature job, the one that would finally let him open Ballard's studio and stop working for other people. The hotel needed bridge financing to get through construction. The bridge financing was coming through a regional bank. The regional bank's single largest depositor was a trust administered by Gideon Frost, who had been the Ravenscroft family's chief counsel for 22 years. Nadia didn't own Curtis's hotel deal, but she was connected to it, through 3 quiet layers of paper, to the exact point where a single phone call could make it stop breathing. She didn't make the call. Not yet. She sat in her brownstone with her dog and her file, and her father's people arriving one by one, and she waited for Curtis to notice she was gone. It took him 9 hours. He came home from the restaurant close to midnight, after dropping Bianca at her apartment, and spending 2 hours at a bar, telling a buddy how oversensitive his wife had gotten lately. He walked into a dark, silent house. Otis's blanket in the kitchen was empty. He assumed the dog was upstairs. Nadia's side of the closet hadn't been touched. Her car was still in the garage, and it took him until the next morning to notice the small things. Her charger gone from the outlet, her prenatal vitamins gone from the counter, an old duffel gone from the top shelf. And the dog. The dog was actually gone. He called her. Voicemail, he called again. Voicemail, he texted. Read. No reply. He called Gloria. She's off pouting at some friend's house, Gloria said. She'll be back by the weekend. That kind always comes back. Nadia did not come back. Around noon, Curtis got a call from an attorney he'd never heard of, informing him that his wife had obtained a protective order, that all contact was to go through counsel, and that a divorce petition was in preparation. His first reaction was outrage. His second was confusion. His third came about an hour later, in his own lawyer's office, when the lawyer finished reading the financial exhibits and set the pages down very carefully and looked at his client the way you look at someone standing on ice that started to crack. Curtis, she's got records of everything. Every mortgage payment, every bill, every time she covered a gap in your accounts. She's got a physician's report from that night, and she's got video. I need you to tell me exactly what happened outside that restaurant. Curtis sat in the good leather chair and felt the floor of his life shift, not all at once, but the way a building shifts when someone starts pulling out the foundation one block at a time. Her revenge, when it came, wasn't loud. It was structural. She didn't attack his life. She withdrew from it, and the withdrawing was the whole weapon, because it showed him, showed everyone, the size of the hole she'd been filling. Week 1, the mortgage payment bounced. The auto draft had run off her account. Curtis didn't know the lender's name, didn't know the login, didn't know the account number. He spent an afternoon on hold and got nowhere. Week 2, the utilities, gas, then water, then internet. Same story, her name on the accounts, her system, her passwords in her head, and nowhere else. Shut-off notices came, and he stacked them on the counter next to the takeout boxes, because he didn't know where the files were and wouldn't have known which files to open if he'd found them. Week 3, he tried to be a good sport about the dog he'd never fed. A woman at the office mentioned that old dogs need their meds, and only then did it fully land that the dog was gone, actually gone, and he didn't know the medication or the dose or the clinic or even the name of the vet who wasn't his wife. He called her attorney to ask about it. The attorney, dry as a legal pad, informed him the animal was safe and cared for, and that no further information would be provided. Curtis hung up, not knowing whether to be relieved or furious, and landed, as he did with everything now, on a low background hum of fear. Week 4, the hotel deal began to stall. The bridge financing that had been sailing through hit an unexplained snag at the bank. Calls went unreturned. Emails got vague answers about additional review. His partner started asking questions he couldn't answer. The timeline slipped, the developer got cold, and it never once crossed Curtis's mind to connect any of it to his wife. Why would it? She scanned tumors on golden retrievers for a living. She drove a Subaru with a cracked cup holder. The idea that Nadia was tied, through 3 layers of trusts, to the money grinding his one big chance into powder, was as unthinkable to him as the idea that the woman who wrapped the dog's pill in turkey every morning controlled a fortune that could have bought his whole firm 1,000 times, and never felt it. Gloria came to help. She lasted 9 days. In those 9 days, cleaning out the house to get it ready to sell, Gloria found the machinery, the spreadsheets, the color-coded household app with every recurring bill and every appointment and every renewal date, the binder with the insurance policies and the warranty cards and the vet records, tabbed and current, the standing maintenance schedule for the furnace, the gutters, the car. She found the invisible thing that Nadia had been running, silently, on top of a full-time job for 4 years. She did all of it, Gloria said to Shelby on the phone, in a voice Shelby later described as strange, almost frightened. Every single thing in this house. I had no idea. She was always kind of intense about it, Shelby offered. She was the only adult in this family, Gloria said, and I helped run her off. It was the first honest sentence Gloria Ballard had spoken about her daughter-in-law in 4 years, and it arrived far too late to be worth anything. Bianca held on for 6 weeks. She'd fallen for a version of Curtis Ballard, the polished one, with the beautiful house and the effortless dinners and the momentum, the man who clearly had it all together. What she'd actually fallen for was Nadia's engineering. The pressed shirts were Nadia. The dinners were Nadia. The stability was Nadia. Peel that away. And what was left was a man who ate cereal standing over the sink 4 nights a week, who couldn't find the water main, who had a growing pile of red-stamped notices on his counter, and a dying lawn, and a deal coming apart in his hands. Bianca ran the arithmetic. It didn't add up. She left on a Wednesday afternoon, with her emerald coat over her arm, and she didn't bother saying goodbye, because there was nothing left in the house worth the words. Curtis sat on the couch that night with a bourbon, and the remote, and a house coming apart around him, and felt, for the first time in his life, the specific bottomless panic of a man discovering he had never been the main character of his own story. He'd been a supporting part in someone else's, and the lead had walked off set, and the whole production was collapsing without her. The gala was Gloria's idea, 3 months after Nadia left, and still, this was the thing. Still, none of them knew who she was. Gloria had decided to rehabilitate the family name by organizing a charity benefit. And with a genius for the tender spot that she'd honed over a lifetime, she chose the Harbor City's big no-kill animal rescue, the coalition of shelters where Nadia had volunteered every other Saturday for years. It was a transparent maneuver, using the shelter Nadia loved to launder the family's reputation and, not incidentally, to build the kind of goodwill that might help Curtis land his next deal. Gloria booked a ballroom. She printed programs. She invited 200 people, and seated herself at the head table with Curtis beside her, freshly barbered and in a new suit, playing the part of the grieving, generous, misunderstood husband. There was one empty seat at the head table. It was reserved for the evening's principal donor, whose gift had, that very morning, become the largest single donation in the rescue coalition's history, a gift routed through something called the Ravenscroft Foundation. Gloria's event coordinator had confirmed a representative would attend. Gloria didn't recognize the foundation's name, and why would she? Ravenscrofts didn't go on magazine covers. They didn't walk red carpets. They lived in the layer of wealth where being seen is a liability, and they guarded their anonymity the way other families guard the good silver. At 7:45, the ballroom doors opened, and Nadia walked in, and she was not the woman any of them remembered. The scrubs were gone. The tired ponytail was gone. The smallness, the careful, apologetic, disappearing smallness they'd all decided was her whole personality, was gone. She wore a long, unornamented dress the color of deep water, cut with the kind of precision that announces money. Not by shouting, but by fitting perfectly. Her mother's thimble hung at her collarbone on its fine chain. Her hair was down, and she walked the length of that room the way a person walks into a house she owns, unhurried and certain. Because the foundation whose name was printed in gold on every program had, as of that morning, become the single largest benefactor in the history of the place. Gloria had chosen. Precisely because Nadia loved it. Gloria saw her first. Gloria's face ran through the whole sequence in about 4 seconds. Surprise, confusion, alarm, and then a pale dawning of something she didn't have a word for yet. The sense that the ground had moved and she couldn't tell which way was down. Curtis saw her next. His mouth came open. Nothing came out. He looked at her, and he looked at the coordinator hurrying over to pull out the empty chair beside him. And he looked down at the program in his own hand, where the words Ravenscroft Foundation sat in gold. And something behind his eyes began, quietly, to come apart. Nadia sat down in the seat beside him. She did not greet him. She did not greet his mother. She picked up the program and read it. At the podium, the coordinator introduced the evening's lead donor. She read from a card, the Ravenscroft Foundation, established under the family's name generations ago, one of the largest and most private charitable institutions on the eastern seaboard, represented tonight by its newly appointed director, Nadia Ravenscroft. The room stood and applauded. Curtis did not move. In her lap, Gloria's hands were gripping each other white. Nadia rose, and she walked to the podium, and she looked out at 200 people. Some she knew from Saturday mornings scrubbing kennels. Some from Curtis's professional circle, most strangers, and she spoke for a little under 5 minutes. She didn't talk about herself. She talked about the animals nobody wanted. The old ones, and the sick ones, and the ones who'd been thrown away, and about the volunteers who showed up before dawn and cleaned up mess no one would ever thank them for, and did it again the next week. She talked about the people who hold things together and are never seen doing it, and are called controlling right up until the moment they stop, and only then, in the wreckage, get called essential. She did not say Curtis's name. She did not say Gloria's. She didn't have to. Every person in that room who knew the Ballard family understood exactly what they were hearing. A woman who had been shoved off a curb into the rain standing in a gold-lit ballroom, in a voice she never once raised, letting them know the curb had been hers all along. She went back to her seat and picked up her water glass and took a sip. Curtis leaned toward her, his voice barely there. Nadia, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. She set the glass down and turned her head just enough to look at him, and her face was the one she used to wear in the exam room when an owner asked if the old dog was going to make it, and the honest answer was no. Calm. Direct. Finished. I know you didn't, Curtis, she said. That's the whole point. You were married to me for 4 years and you never once asked a real question about who I was. Not one. Because you weren't curious. And now you're sitting at a table with my family's name printed on the program. And the only thing you can think to say is that you didn't know. She let that sit. I've already moved on, she said. You should start trying. She turned back to the room and did not look at him again for the rest of the night. He sat beside her for 2 more hours, motionless, while his mother clutched her own hands in her lap, and his old professional contacts came by to shake Nadia's hand and congratulate her family on its generosity. And not one single person, the whole evening, thought to ask Curtis how he was holding up. What was left after the gala finished itself over the following weeks. The hotel deal died. The bridge financing was formally declined. No reason given. His partners walked. The firm, already coming apart from months of disorder, from Curtis's simple inability to run the systems his wife had quietly run for him, started shedding clients. And the lease on his showroom, which was tied through paper he would never trace to the woman who used to wrap a pill in a slice of turkey every morning, came up for its scheduled review. And the new terms weren't even cruel. They were just market rate. But market rate, with no one secretly subsidizing the gaps in his budget, was more than Curtis Ballard could afford. Gloria called the attorney and asked to speak to Nadia directly. The attorney declined. Gloria left a voicemail instead. It ran 11 minutes. It used the word sorry 3 times, the word misunderstanding 5, and the word family a dozen. And in all 11 minutes it never once named a single specific thing Gloria had actually done. Nadia listened to it one time, standing on the roof of the brownstone in the cold, and then she deleted it. Shelby sent a text. Hey Nadia, hope you're doing well. I know things got complicated. I've been thinking about starting a little nonprofit, and I wondered if there was any way to connect through your foundation. Nadia read it and set the phone down. Shelby could apply through the website, like anyone else. The woman who'd called her a little machine was welcome to get in line behind all the other machines. Curtis called one last time, through the lawyer. He wanted to know if there was any chance, any at all, of reconciliation. Nadia was on the roof when the message reached her. The baby had come 3 weeks earlier, on a clear, cold morning. A girl 7 pounds even 10 fingers, a full head of dark hair, and a furious, healthy set of lungs. She was asleep in a bassinet beside Nadia's chair, one small hand curled around the edge of a white blanket. Otis lay in his patch of weak sun a few feet away, snoring, thyroid pill already tucked into this morning's turkey. Nadia looked at her daughter, and she looked out over the wet rooftops toward the harbor, and she touched the thimble at her throat. Tell him I forgave him weeks ago, she said to the attorney, and tell him that forgiving him and going back to him are 2 completely different things, and only one of them was ever on the table. On a gray Sunday the next fall, almost a year after the night in the rain, Nadia sat on that same roof with a cup of coffee and her daughter in her lap. Her father sat across from her in a wicker chair, eating a piece of toast he'd made himself, because Whitfield Ravenscroft, unlike Curtis, had always been able to feed himself and considered it the absolute floor of being a grown person. Otis was asleep against her foot, warm and heavy, his gray muzzle twitching at some dream. The baby was awake, studying the world with the grave, total concentration of someone meeting daylight for the first time. Her small hand reached up and closed around the thimble. Nadia looked down. The baby's fingers were wrapped tight around the worn silver, gripping with the fierce, blind strength that newborns have. And Nadia felt the chain pull gently against the back of her neck. She thought about her mother, and the bed by the window, and the decision she'd made at 11, to be the one in the room, and not the one who wrote the check. She thought about 4 years of holding up a house and a marriage, and a man who never once looked down to see what was keeping him standing. She thought about the rain and the shove and the cold metal of a stranger's car under her palm, and the 11 seconds it had taken her to decide she was done being small. Her father watched her and didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He'd spent the last year watching her rebuild an entire life from the ground up. Not with his money and not with his name, but with the same quiet, relentless competence she'd been using all along. The exact competence Curtis had called controlling and Gloria had called obsessive, and Shelby had called mechanical. It hadn't been any of those things. It was the plainest thing in the world, and the rarest. She was a woman who knew how to hold something together, and who had finally understood that a woman who can mend anything can also one day decide to set it down and walk away whole. The baby let go of the thimble and reached instead for the thin light coming over the harbor. Nadia lifted her up into it. She wasn't angry anymore. The anger had done its job and been retired. She wasn't sad, though sadness still came sometimes in small waves, and she let it pass through without grabbing hold. And she wasn't out for revenge. The revenge had been finished a long time ago, and it had been the quietest thing imaginable. Just a woman removing herself from a machine that couldn't run without her, and watching it stop. She had hidden a fortune to go looking for love, and she'd found an empty house instead. And in the empty house, she'd finally found the one thing all the money in 19 countries had never once been able to buy her. The plain relief of being no one's anything, of being looked at straight, of being exactly and only herself. She named the baby Ingrid, after her mother, and she said the name out loud on the roof in the cold light, and it was the truest thing she'd said in years.